Hello, and welcome to the Three Questions Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of wealth management and connect you with industry experts. I'm your host, Wayne Baxter, Senior Executive Manager at One Capital Management. If you or someone close to you is a non-U.S. citizen living in the United States and trying to figure out how to qualify for Medicare, stay tuned. Our topic this week is the three questions non-U.S. citizens should ask about qualifying for Medicare. Thank you for taking time to check us out. And if you enjoy this episode of the Three Questions Podcast, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. For high net worth non-U.S. citizens living or planning to retire in the United States, Medicare is often one of the most misunderstood parts of retirement planning. Many are surprised to learn that eligibility is not automatic and depends on specific immigration status, work credits, and residency rules. Now, let's see if we can provide some clarity on this as we tackle the three questions high net worth families should ask before choosing their Medicare plan at age 65. Joining me on the Three Question Podcast is Paul Cholock. He is a Florida-based Medicare specialist who works extensively with non-U.S. citizens, immigrants, and globally mobile families to help them navigate Medicare eligibility, enrollment, and alternative coverage options. Paul brings clear, practical guidance to what can be a very confusing process for those on visas, green cards, or other immigration statuses. Paul, thank you for making yourself available today. This is an interesting topic. It's been a fascinating one for me since I relocated to the United States back about 13 and a half years ago. And I mentioned to you before we went on the air that this is like the black box for most of us immigrants. And really glad you were able to make time for us today. Appreciate it very
My
much.
pleasure.
On one of our more recent podcasts we just had here, we discussed Medicare as it relates to U.S. citizens who are turning 65. Today, we're going to focus on non-U.S. residents. And with healthcare costs continue to rise, and many who are on E-2 visas or green cards are now approaching age 65, the question I have to you just to get started here is how important is it to get this right early to prevent any expensive coverage gaps? So how important is it to get this figured out right at the gate?
Well, when I think the first thing people have to recognize is that the U.S. system is very different than what they're used to.
Yes,
So,
I can tell you, as a Canadian, I will concur in very much.
so,
You've
so
got me
U.S.
so
works,
far.
and basically, I hear that it's not just Canadians that raise that. I mean, it's people from virtually every other country. Their systems are very different, and it is going to require a different understanding than they presently have. So, I think the first thing they should understand is that Medicare is an entitlement program. Um, Based on years of participation in the Social Security system. And if somebody is entitled, they'll get a benefit. Uh, and the benefit is basically going to cover both hospital type services as well as provider type services. And once they qualify, once a U.S. person qualifies, once a non-U.S. person qualifies, the benefit is the same. So there's not going to be a difference in the benefits. There's a difference in how they qualify. So that's the main thing to understand. And there's for a foreigner, there's two things to understand about qualifying for Medicare. One, if they have 40 quarters of credit and they have a valid residency, which means any kind of a valid visa, not only a green card, if they'll qualify with 40 quarters of credit. Excuse me. The If they can't meet that rule, and many of these people will not be able to meet that rule, there's a special rule if they're married to a U.S. citizen. Okay. Secondly, if they had a green card and are here for a minimum of 5 consecutive years, they can qualify. So that's the other thing to understand. The point being, if they have less than 40 quarters of Social Security credit, they will pay for the hospital part of Medicare, a portion of it, depending on how many quarters of credit they have. But
So
that
so
same
in
thing could
Medicare
happen to
there's
a
a
U.S.
plan.
citizen who didn't
So
have 40 credit.
so you want to clarify on that? There's a plan A and plan B. Maybe you could just for the folks
Okay,
listening.
Plan A is the hospital, and it's basically got a deductible for the first 60 days, and then it's got various kinds of copays for hospital services and skilled nursing services. That's Part A of Medicare. Uh, And then Part B of Medicare is providers, basically doctors and similar providers. There is also a section of Medicare called Part D. It's a separate section. Okay. But the basic qualification, if you qualify for A and B, then the Part D will come in. Okay. There's no separate qualification kind of thing, basically.
You mentioned earlier about the U.S. citizen. A person married to a U.S. citizen would qualify. So I have a hypothetical, and I'm going to just throw this out here for the fun of the conversation. And again, you know, I rely heavily on my Medicare experts in advising my clients. I do not pretend to be a Medicare expert. I know my lane, and they say
Uh-huh.
humility is accepting your limitations, and I certainly will accept my limitations in regards to the complexity of Medicare. So people like yourself are gold to me, I will say right now. But so you mentioned earlier about U.S. citizens, but I'm a U.S. citizen now. But believe it or not, Paul, you mentioned about the 40 work credits, right? I just qualified for my 40th work credit this quarter.
Yeah, because you said you've been here 13 years. So yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, finally, but you see, that doesn't, 40 does, it's usually 10 years, but before
Yeah.
my, so my question is this. If I was a U.S. citizen 2 years ago, I became a U.S. citizen in 2023. So even though I didn't have, even though I didn't have my 40 work credits, if my spouse was like myself, would they qualify for Medicare even if I didn't have my
Well, I'll
40?
give you yeah,
Even
I have a client, for example.
that's another layer of complexity, isn't it?
It is, it is. I have a client, just for an example, who is married to a Bermudian, as it is, okay? And he just retired from Bermuda. He's in the process because she is a U.S. citizen on Medicare. So he had to go through a process of getting his green card. It takes a little while to get it. Once he got his green card, he qualified for Medicare. So he did not have to meet the test.
So we also have to understand the difference between, and again, I know this is not your lane, but just because you qualify for Medicare doesn't mean you automatically qualify for Social Security too, because Social Security, in order to qualify that, you do have to have your 40 work credits, do not pass go.
Right,
So it just
right.
as an and
So there is a provision
that's
on Medicare.
another
If you don't
layer of
have the 40,
complexity there.
so there's a difference now between Part A, that's you'll pay if you have less than 40 credits, okay? Part
Right.
B of Medicare, which is the provider side of Medicare, basically has a payment of right now it's 202.90 for most people, but there is a special provision called the income related monthly adjustment amount, which affects high paid people. Basically, somebody making it. It's very complicated to explain, but it's based on income from 2 years ago, and it can vary up to over I don't even have that right in front of me, but it's over $500 depending on their income. There's different levels, and they can be if they're over $500,000 of income married and filing jointly, it can be over $500 for each of them.
So this is why we want to have Paul on here, and why I want to have Paul, quite frankly, in my back pocket when I'm working with clients, because as you can tell already, we haven't even got to the questions, and we're already into major complexity.
It gets complex, unfortunately. Yeah. Well,
So
look,
be,
and don't feel bad because the U.S. citizens I work with don't understand it necessarily either.
I know that for a fact. So before we get to our three questions, one more thing. So many non-U.S. citizens who have lived and worked in the U.S. for years, they're surprised that this Medicare eligibility isn't necessarily automatic, if that's right. And that
Correct. They got to apply.
right. And the rules are quite different to some extent than U.S. citizens, right? So, would you say, Paul, is some of the biggest misconceptions when you're dealing with someone like myself, for example, immigrant moved to the United States, or a prospective client of mine, one of my expat Canadian clients that are moving to the United States. In your experience, what surprises them the most what's some of the biggest misconceptions?
But one, and there are some alternatives that people don't know about or they don't even really think about for getting coverage, which is not Medicare coverage for people over age 65. So that is something to understand. Um, so the Affordable Care Act, which is the part of the U.S. Coverage which applies to people under age 65, The rules there to apply, there's no green card requirement. The requirement is legal residency. So somebody who is not, who is under, well, it doesn't matter if they're 64 or 66, let's say, either way, they can qualify um, for one of these plans having a legal residency in the U.S. If their income is below a certain amount, and the kind of people you're talking about are high income people, basically,
Hmm.
but if their income is less than 400% of what's called the federal poverty limit, they can qualify for an advanced premium tax credit, or otherwise called a tax subsidy. If they're above that number, uh, they can buy a plan without getting any help from the government. And that's important. And a lot of people just don't know that that's a possibility who are over, who are applying for Medicare and they find out about this rule that they got to be here for 5 years. So that so I do a lot of work on what's called the Affordable Care Act, and the Affordable Care Act plans can be effective for people who are legal residents who don't qualify for Medicare.
The legal residence is the key part, though. In other words,
Right.
people who've overstayed their TN visa, for example, or whatever other visa, they're still here. They're not going to
No,
qualify.
they're illegals in that case. Right. The visas has to be current.
Yeah, exactly. That's great context. Okay, let's get to our three questions non-U.S. citizens should ask about qualifying for Medicare. Let's get to question number one, Paul. Here we go. I'm
Yeah.
looking into applying for Medicare. However, I'm not a U.S. citizen. How do I qualify, and will Medicare work the same for me as it would for a U.S. citizen? Paul, over
Well,
to you.
okay, let's take the second part first. The answer is Medicare would work the same if once you qualify, okay? But as far as the qualifications, there's two. You either qualify based on having 40 quarters of credit and being a lawful resident, or you qualify on the basis of having a green card and being here for 5 continuous years.
Okay, so
That's
once,
basically the requirement.
yeah, so once eligible, just as a follow-up, just to clarify here for the folks listening here, because again, this is so layered.
Okay.
Once eligible, are there any difference in the premiums in coverage or out-of-pocket expenses compared to a U.S. citizen would pay? Is it any different?
Not based on the same criteria. I mean, it's based on quarters of credit of Social Security. If they
So it
have the
doesn't
same,
matter whether or not you're a
if they have
citizen
the
or
same
a,
Social Security credits, it'll work the same way.
okay, good enough. So again, our topic today is the three questions non-U.S. citizens should ask about qualifying for Medicare. And again, joining us on the podcast is Paul Cholak. He's a Florida-based Medicare specialist who works extensively with non-U.S. citizens, immigrants, and globally mobile families to help them navigate Medicare eligibility, enrollment, and alternative coverage options. And thank God we have Paul because he's an incredible resource. Paul, let's move on to question number two. I'm 64 years old and recently qualified for an E2 investor visa, something I'm familiar with.
Hmm.
Medicare coverage is something I need to address. What are some of my options? And are there any realistic alternatives to Medicare coverage?
And the answer is there is a realistic alternative if they can't, particularly if they can't qualify for Medicare, and that is they can qualify for an Affordable Care Act plan if they are a legal resident.
Is that simple? So if they are okay, so let's go back to
And
what
the
does
way it
he?
works, let me explain. They're always
Yes.
considered, regardless of what age they apply, they pay as a 64-year-old.
Okay. Okay. So an example of somebody who gets an E2 visa. You and I both know in Florida and all over the United States, I know immigration attorneys that are working with people looking to get E2 visas, and they can happen at any time. Although I'm always cautioning my fellow Canadians about making sure the importance of financial planning and all of this, and making sure that you have the financial resources in place is so important when you're making a relocation like immigrating to the United States, and that obviously medical costs is something you need to consider. But if you are recently obtained an E2 investor visa, you're legitimately legal in the country, you have a 5-year visa, and you are, like I said, 64 years old,
And
deciding
the
you
visa is
want
still
to,
current.
and the visa just has been issued, we'll say within the last 6 months. I'm just making up a
No,
hypothetical.
you only got 60 days from the date of the visa to apply.
So you have, so
In
you
other
cannot,
words, there's two types of requirements.
okay,
One, for the date of you must be a legal resident to be able to qualify.
right.
If you first qualify You've got basically there's a 60-day rule to apply for an Affordable Care Act plan. Okay. If you don't follow that rule, there's what's called open enrollment on the Affordable Care Act. And open enrollment this coming year, it's going to change. It'll be between open enrollment means you can apply only during open enrollment unless you have what's called a qualifying life event. So if the rule for next year will be open enrollment will run from November 1st of this year to December 15th of this year for a January 1st date. Now it gets a little complicated. It depends where in the country you're at. If they're on what's called the federal exchange, where let's say 2/3 of the states basically are, open enrollment runs between those two dates.
So November 1st and December 15th of
Let's say in
2026.
Florida they do, but in a state like California, which has its own exchange, they have a little flexibility between the period of November 1st and the end of December. Basically,
Okay.
they've got a 45-day period within that period for open enrollment. So it can vary a little bit on a non a state that does not participate on the federal exchange, but it's basically a 45-day period
So somebody who comes down to the U.S. on an E-2 visa, they have 60 days to qualify to apply
from when
for.
they first get the visa.
Got it.
Okay.
Interesting.
Otherwise, they can apply during open enrollment when that applies to them. Okay.
Got it. Wow. This is fascinating. Um, Paul, like I said, you are an incredible fountain of knowledge on this. I bet there's a very few people who knew that specific rule. So if you're coming to the U.S. on an E-2 visa and you're not 65 years old and you want to get any kind of Medicare coverage, you need to apply within the first 60 days after the
No,
visa.
that's Affordable Care Act. That's not Medicare.
Affordable Care Act. Pardon me. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, perfect.
Now,
Okay,
let me explain, Wayne. I've had people who don't know that rule and they come to me after the 60 days are over.
right.
So if they don't meet that 60-day rule, then they can only apply during open enrollment unless they have some other kind of qualifying life event.
So that once they apply for the Affordable Care Act within their first 60 days of being in the US, that will be in force at least until that visa has to be renewed, correct?
Well, basically, Affordable Care Act plans renew every year, so that they
But
can change.
would it not
Open
be an
enrollment will
auto?
occur every year.
But okay, so let's say you're the one who's helping guide this. If they apply within the first 60 days, they get their coverage. They will come back to you the following year and
They
renew.
want to look every year at the plan. The plans are going to change every year. Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay, good enough. And
Now, there's another.
as long as their E-2 visa is active or then that they can qualify. And but
Correct.
when
Correct.
they turn okay, so I knew this was going to happen. I told you before we started, your answers would provoke more questions, and exactly what's happening here. So
Okay.
so now the person that was 64 who got the E-2 visa, and now they've turned 65. Can they then, on that E-2 visa, apply for Medicare after they turn
They
65?
have no. They have to have a green card, 5 years continuous residency for
So
Medicare.
they're still going to be on the
They
Affordable
still
Care
have
Act
that.
for
Yeah,
the first.
and this is not well known at all. This is theoretical, but it is there. If they've applied for a first for an Affordable Care Act plan and then apply for Medicare, they are allowed to keep both plans, Medicare, and then when they get uh, Medicare covered, they could have Medicare too. They wouldn't necessarily want to do that, but it is an option.
All right. All right,
Now,
Paul,
there is one other option that we haven't covered that I think we ought to.
please, okay. So maybe what we'll do is I'm going to get through the next question and then we'll
Okay.
get into the other option. Okay. So let's move
Okay.
on to question number three. Okay. Here we go. I am 66 years old
Okay.
and I'm in the process of qualifying for a green card. I won't have the 40 work credits required for Social Security and I presume Medicare. Are there private health insurance options that I can consider? Okay, Paul, over to you.
Okay, this is changing all the time. It just changed, okay? But there are plans that you can qualify for if you can provide a 9-digit identification number, which would be a Social Security number or something else with 9 digits, okay? Um,
So you're talking about
And
like a T, you're talking about like an ITIN number or something like
it's got to be
that?
9 digits, whatever. I don't know what.
A nine
Yeah.
digit ID number.
Yes. So if they got a social security number, they'll qualify. Okay.
Exactly.
But
Or the,
but
or
people
the
without social security numbers can also qualify if they have another means of identification with 9 digits. Okay. Uh,
interesting.
the point being, though, on those plans, they have to answer underwriting questions. So if they can successfully answer the underwriting questions saying no, okay, uh, they can qualify for the plan. They can keep the plan indefinitely.
And that's the Medicare plan. A
It's
Medicare
not a
plan?
Medicare plan. It's not an Affordable Care Act plan either. It's neither. In other words, it's a standalone plan.
It's a completely private plan.
Right, right.
Fascinating. But there's an underwriting process. You have to answer health questions.
Simple, yeah. You have to answer health questions, but if you answer the health questions, and they're all no because they're yes no questions. Okay,
Right.
you can qualify, and there are no pre-existing condition limitations on those plans if you qualify. Now the plans differ from how typical traditional Affordable Care Act plans and Medicare work as far as what they cover, but the plans are available.
So
And I don't think, by the way, and when you and I have talked and when others have talked, people don't really understand that the ACA and these underwritten
the ACA being
plans
the
do
Affordable
exist.
Care, yeah, the ACA for those listening is the Affordable Care Act. Just so people,
Right.
I get heck all the time for my acronyms, Paul. So that's like back when I had my radio show in Toronto, I used to get in trouble all the time with the radio station because I used to use all the acronyms that we all use, and there's like,
I
no,
know. Got to be careful of
it's all
it.
right. It's all good. So you said that there was, and you mentioned an alternative plan. So the one you just referred to, that was the one you remember we in our last question. You said there was one other alternative. Was that
That's
the
the
one?
other alternative.
Okay,
Right.
perfect. That's what I thought. Okay. Here's a question for you. Based on what we chatted about today, and I'll tell you, this was one of the most roaming type of, we covered a lot. And, I would have to, for folks listening in, and I know there will be, uh, based on what we talked about today, what is one actionable step a non-US citizen should take right now if they're approaching age 65 and they're concerned about health coverage in the US? So they're in the
Well, they ought
US.
to be looking into these non-Medicare plans because to see if they can qualify.
Yeah.
Okay, and they probably don't realize, and I'm not sure when you and I have talked, we've never really talked about those as alternatives.
Yeah.
So,
So here's the thing I would say. This is, how in my, the do-it-yourselfer,
right.
this is not do-it-yourselfer work. This is you someone like yourself it's a no-brainer that they want to get you involved because you're far more knowledgeable and know where to look. So, we have this is obviously on video as you well know, and we have all your contact information underneath you on the screen. But I know for certain there's going to be people listening on Apple's podcasts, on Spotify. They may have this on their car driving around listening or out for a walk. For those folks who are listening, what is the best way for them to reach you? How can they get a hold of you? What's the best way?
Well, probably the best way would be to email me at pmcholak@gmail.
All right. Okay. Good enough, Paul.
With contact information because part of the problem is when we talk, this is another issue here. Excuse me. When we talk about Medicare enrollment in the US, um, most kinds of plans, the enrollment in most kinds of plans have to be recorded under US law. Okay.
Really?
So I have a recorded line and I have a non-recorded line. That's
Yeah, I
why I
noticed that when I
have.
called you earlier that you state specifically that all the conversations are recorded.
Well,
And
they
that's a
are when we're
and and
if
that's
I'm
a
going to
pre
enroll you in a most Medicare plans, okay, and let's not get complicated beyond that. Generally, it's got to be recorded,
is a recorded conversation.
right?
Interesting.
There's
Paul,
some exceptions to that, but here's the thing: when you start talking about enrollment in Medicare plans, it's very highly regulated in the U.S. Okay, there's a lot of games that go on in the U.S. on enrollment, where there are a lot of foreign call centers, for example, who get involved in this, and they make illegal phone calls. Um, the government's trying to crack down on some of this, but people have to watch out about illegal phone calls they'll get. Do not ever give your Medicare number out to one of these people because what they may do without your knowledge, uh, theoretically, they could enroll you in a Medicare plan and you don't even know it.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so there,
amazing.
there's a lot of, I mean, there is a lot of fraud going on in Medicare. Okay. So number one, from my standpoint, um, I am very, very, very compliant. Okay. I'm kind of anal in this regard. Like part of it's because of my, I was in the U.S. Army for a while. And it's kind of like the Army mentality in a way. You know, I am very compliance oriented, but agents can lose licenses in the U.S. if they don't follow the rules.
Well, we don't want that happening here. Paul, I want to thank you so much for making time for me today. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. I can definitely see where there'll be opportunities in the future for us to have you back on the podcast. Paul Cholak is a Florida-based Medicare specialist who works extensively with non-U.S. citizens, immigrants, and globally mobile families to help them navigate Medicare eligibility, enrollment, alternative coverage options as well. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank
Great
you,
seeing you.
Wayne.
Appreciate it. I look forward to bringing you the Three Questions podcast, and I hope you find them educational and informative. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. And to receive notification of when our latest episode has been posted, please click on the notifications bell. Lastly, to schedule an online Zoom consultation with me to discuss your wealth management needs, please click on the link in the description box below, www.onecapital.com/meet with Wayne. Thank you, and we will see you soon.